Welcome back, everyone. We are coming at you again live from Westland Place with the Blink podcast. Thank you for all of the feedback and ideas from the last episode. I'll certainly do a better job at trying to keep my eyes open for the duration of this one, so thank you for that. Themes of the series so far, obviously, are the big levers for engagement in 2025, and I am delighted to be diving into one of those topics, namely how to get leaders more involved in internal comms today, with the wonderful Shola Kay, who's joining us live from the studio. Welcome, Shola.
Hello. Great to be here.
Now, Shola, we obviously are quite well acquainted after a dinner, which maybe we'll touch on in a moment, last year. But for all of the audience listening, do you want to give a brief introduction, I guess, to your story and what it is that you're up to?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Shola. I work as primarily a keynote speaker and a trainer, and the areas that I work in are empathy and also communication and inclusion. And my story, I started out very timid, somebody who really hated speaking up at work, and then realised that I worked for a company that didn't have much empathy when I got put on probation very quickly. Fortunately for me, I had a colleague that was very empathetic. Didn't even know what she did in particular, but just through listening and being supportive, it really helped turn around my performance at work. And had similar situations in other companies. I won't sort of bore you with all my tales of woe at this moment in time. However, it made me realise that empathy is something that can be lacking in organisations, and I started doing a lot more work in this area. So I wrote a couple of communications books, but I also think that communication really backs up empathy, because it's one of those things that people don't quite know how to display or what it really means in the working world. And so once you start giving people some step-by-step communication tools that help support that, it really does make a huge difference.
And I feel like you can't really have one without the other. You can't be a good communicator and not empathetic, right?
Totally.
I feel they come hand in hand. And I did not know that about you, that you hated speaking and speaking up. And so what a journey you've been on.
Yeah, definitely.
Amazing.
I'm excited because, as Georgie knows, I'm sort of allergic to these kind of high-level concepts and topics, talking about them in the podcast environment. And I think what's excited me most is, what you're talking about there in terms of the step-by-step tools that you can empower people with in order to start practicing and exercising this empathy muscle. So excited to get into all of that, Shola. Right, well, why don't I kick us off then?
Sorry, Peter. Sorry. I feel that I'm throwing it in there again.
Are we stopping?
We are pausing for a moment of forced fun.
Oh, for God's sake.
No Blink event would be complete without it.
Where are the pens?
No pens today.
Okay.
I'm not going to throw you the same forced fun nugget.
Does Ines know about this?
Oh, Ness is shaking her head. But I thought a good way to get to know Shola, and maybe I could get to know you a bit more as well, might be with some quick fire questions before we get into the good stuff of Shola's teaser, 3 C's. All right, the first 2 are going to be for Shola, and then Peter, you can get involved.
These aren't in my notes.
What a shame.
Okay,
Shola, I want to know the best place you've ever done a speech, keynote, speaking engagement.
That's a nice one.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you for asking. I mean, it's a tough one really, because I've got to travel a fair bit, but actually the best place is going to be the next place. So when I leave here today, I'm going to the Barbican.
Okay.
And I'm going to speak on the Barbican stage. And for me, it might not be the biggest venue, but I've seen so many iconic acts perform there over the years that to walk out on that stage and think, oh my gosh, my favourite singer was here, is very exciting to me.
I love it. So step 1, Barbican, step 2, Wembley. So you can say the iconic, hello Wembley. You should do that today.
I
hello
once,
Barbican.
years ago, got tickets for me and my wife to go and see Ludovico Einaudi at the Barbican.
Oh my gosh.
Hottest tickets in town, really, really pleased and delighted to go. I got there and the show was about to start and I called her and she'd just gone to the totally different wrong theatre. So I sat there for the first half of the Barbican by myself.
Oh no.
Yeah.
Poor.
I'm sure everyone will come to the correct venue this afternoon, though. She's a special case. So.
Okay, next quick fire question is, what's one word you would use to describe a great communicator?
I would say engaging, because I think people often feel that a great communicator, it's all one way. If they say the right things and have the right energy, then everyone will be like,
tick box, good communicator, job done.
That's it, yeah. And then they forget that there's somebody on the other end listening and who needs to be included and encouraged, etc. So I think if you can be an engaging communicator and get people involved in whatever way, even if they're reflecting on their own situation as you're speaking,
that's still an element of involvement.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Have you got a one word?
Have I got? I know this is a cop out, but I quite. Two things. One, I don't like that word because I think generally it's sort of overused and everyone sort of thinks that there's a sort of siloed definition of what engaging is. But what I really, the reason why I do like it, and I'm going to sort of copy your answer, is to the extent that you can have your own definition of what engaging is. Like, you know, you've got to follow your different, and there's many ways of engaging people, to your point, even if it's just encouraging them to reflect on their own journeys. And I think sometimes people think of engaging as just doing the sort of jazz hands and lights and music thing. And I think that we could do a better job at encouraging people to follow their different, what makes them engaging.
Good point. Yeah, I like that.
Not that anyone's asking, but mine would be inspiring. Similar theme, anyway.
We do want to know, Georgie.
Okay, next question is, this is just a bit of fun. I think it says a lot about you, is what is your go-to emoji?
Oh, for God's sake.
You go first, Peter.
I think my family would just say the thumbs up. I'm just a thumbs up kind of guy. I'm not great on WhatsApp, if I'm honest. At work, which we don't talk about, there's a lot of chat and emojis and so on. So I now kind of have this kind of cognitive problem where I associate WhatsApp with work. So my comms are very low and I'm just a thumbs up kind of guy to just get me out of conversations.
Yeah, classic dad emoji, that one. Yeah. Shola, how about you?
It's a good question. I think my one is the smiling face with the bead of sweat.
Okay,
I quite like that. As in, you've sort of pulled it off, or it's not easy, but you know, here we are.
Yeah.
I think that shows that you're very positive by nature, but then maybe being positive isn't always the easiest thing to be like, woohoo, yay. I love it. I don't know if I've got a go-to because it really depends on how I'm feeling that day, you know.
This is your question, George. You've got to answer it.
Mine's probably, I like the smiling, melting face.
The melting into your own puddle.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Interesting. I don't think I've ever used that one.
Oh, I'll send it to you later. It'll be your new one. Amazing. Okay, next is a one-word answer. What's more important, listening or speaking?
I'm an introvert, and introverts are fabled to be good listeners. And so for me, listening. Definitely.
What's the specific phrasing? Like, what's more important?
What's more important, listening or speaking?
Yeah, which, I mean, I agree with you. And it's like an interesting answer, I guess, for someone like you whose sort of profession is public speaking. But I am with you. I think it is more important to listen than speak. I think listening often informs your speaking. It's kind of the precursor. So
there you go. Yeah.
Same here. 3 votes for listening. Well, that's the end of my first bit of forced fun for today's episode.
Praise the Lord.
But thank you, Shola, for sharing your emojis, your listening techniques, your best stage to yet speak on. But I wanted to give some context about why Shola, why you're here today and why specifically talking about this. I know, Peter, obviously you alluded to a dinner. We met because Blink hosted a dinner last year and I was looking for a speaker to come and sort of set the tone for the dinner, but not any speaker, not someone to come in and maybe deliver, like you said, a one-way session. And it was only sort of 15 minutes to set the tone. And I'd, put some keywords into Google and come across you. And I'm so pleased that we met because everybody came out of that dinner feeling that the vibe was just great. And I'll be honest, when it's all strangers coming together and you're there on your own, it's thinking, oh, I've got to sit down at a dinner. And it was such a great vibe. The energy, the interactions, the connections people made. And Shola, I feel you were just such a huge part of that. And the one negative, constructive piece of feedback was, I wish we could have heard more from Shola because you teased your 3 C's for effective communication. And I thought, what better way to really hash that out a bit more rather than to host another dinner for 45 minutes of you speaking. Let's have you on the podcast. So with that in mind, that's why the episode today is really these 3 C's for communication, and what does that really mean for humanizing leaders and, employee experience.
And just before we go into 3 C's, sorry, just sort of pulling it back for a second, Shola, maybe you could talk to a little bit about why you created them in the first place. Like, what's the real kind of challenge that you saw that made you think about designing this framework?
Yeah. Well, I mentioned that empathy is one of the topics I speak on quite a lot. And I think with any topic, really, you've got to break it down for people. It's so easy to tell people what to do without telling them how. Or, if we look at a lot of companies with their corporate values, for example, they've got these massive, innovation or blah, blah, blah.
Collaborate.
And and then people are like, well, how do I make that become a real thing, So,
especially, by the way, when they're European countries that those missions are translated into English. Worked with an unnamed German company once whose mission literally translated to "Don't just follow through."
Okay.
That makes it even more challenging, I think, for UK audiences to understand how to apply these mission, vision, and values. But anyway, sorry, back to you.
Yeah. No, it's such an interesting one. So I was sort of designing a new keynote on empathy and just thinking about, well, how do we break this down? What and it could be anything, right? But what to me constitutes empathetic communication, and so that's what led me to the 3 C's really. And then for each C, I like to think that there's some sort of step-by-step framework or tool that people can use to help to really bring that to life.
Embody that.
Yeah, exactly.
I love that approach as well, because obviously Peter's already explained that's his pet hate, but I think you can tune into a lot of keynote, similar influencers and speakers like you, Shola, and feel, I understand it, but what does that really mean for me? So again, I'm really excited to get into these 3 C's.
And sorry, last one from me before we do dive in. Like, in your experience, Shola, do you think, when you're working with leaders and so on, that they don't understand the importance of internal communications and engagement and their responsibility to that practice? Or is it more they do understand it, but they just don't know where to start, and so they don't do it? Like, what's the kind of blocker there in your experience?
I think it's both. And I think also, you might have an absolutely brilliant leader. I was with an organisation yesterday and someone was telling me about this leader who's so, tip for the top, they're amazing. But often people are good at the thing that they, their job function, whether that's, in finance or whatever it might be. And they're so brilliant at that they don't really think about all the other bits that need to go alongside that. And we know that with the young or the newer generations, it's so much more important for them to feel that they are a part of things, that they're being empathised with. Old fogies like myself, Gen X, it's not right. You just get your head down, do the work, and hope that you get a paycheck, kind of thing. Whereas that's so different these days. And so I think leaders really need to understand, and not just understand, but then find a way to do it as well. Because not all of them will, however brilliant they might be rubbish at.
Asking the right questions.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I agree. I think connecting with their own generation could be, a challenge in and of itself, because they're sort of having to do something outside of their own kind of remit. But having to communicate and engage cross generations, this is a challenge. Like, I can understand why, as a leader, even if I understand its importance, I don't really know where to start. It's like trying to do a marketing campaign across the spectrum of exactly. Like, who's my target audience? Well, it's kind of everyone. So it's tough. So how can we help then? Like, let's talk about the toolkit and maybe start debunking some of the C's.
Right. So Shola, what's your first C?
Can I? I don't know if I can do a drum roll.
Can we do a drum roll?
Upset the recording.
Yes, we can. Ready?
So the first C is curiosity.
Love.
Yes.
And tell me why is that your first C in your toolkit?
Well, it kind of goes back a little bit to what I was saying about being an engaging speaker. And if you want to engage people, you've got to really know who you're speaking to, what is on their minds, where are they coming from? Because how will you know otherwise how to pitch your content, right? So the opposite, or not the opposite, but one of the enemies of empathy is assumptions. So curiosity is a way to stop ourselves from making assumptions and really, get in there and try and understand what's happening.
I think it's so true. We had a panel event recently and someone had just said, get out there, go and ask people, get involved, ask the questions. And it sounds like basic advice, but it's just so important. And I think the word curiosity is a good one because it's not just a tick box exercise of how are you feeling today? And it's like everyone's well. It's like, but why are you feeling well? Like, what's driving that? And that's the element. It's the behaviour of being curious. It's like step forward, step further.
Totally. As per your earlier question about what's more important, listening or speaking. But how do you coach and advise curiosity then?
Yeah, it's funny because I was with a big group of, it was the senior leadership group of a company, and there were about 150 people. And when I was planning the content beforehand with their organisational development team, we were talking about curiosity. And they were saying, well, most of these individuals will be very curious. They are, but not curious about people, but curious about numbers or curious about the business. Yeah. So the question to ask them is, how curious are you about people? When was the last time that you had a team meeting where you just opened the floor to people and said, well, I'd love to hear what you all think about things? Or how much do you think about psychological safety for people so that they can speak up and share what's going on with them?
Yeah.
Because so many people are, whether it's afraid to share or they just feel that no one really cares about what their views are. So I think it really starts by just asking simple questions and listening and remembering what people say to you, so that then they share even more the next time. Because if you ask and then it's clearly just like, well, you
on to the next question,
your head and it comes out, right?
Yeah.
Then people are going to see that you're insincere and they're not really going to share anything.
Definitely. No, I mean, I agree. Small talk's discovery for relationship building. But this idea that you're talking about of these leaders often have got to places in businesses from being curious about the business.
In their field.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So they have this skill. This is more about sort of trying to change the spotlight from, channel the curiosity into
the right place.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I've not heard it described like that before.
And how did that particular session go with this bunch of curious leaders? Did you feel that you could rechannel that curiosity into the right channel, into the right direction?
Yeah, I think that it was an eye-opener for them, certainly, to be asked that question. And what was very helpful was from the CEO was sort of very interested in modelling this behaviour. And so we need to see it from the role models, don't we, really? Otherwise it can fall by the wayside so easily.
Yes.
So anything like that really does help to support this sort of work.
Amazing. And I want to know if that group of people, leaders, are naturally curious and maybe you've harnessed that and channeled it in the right way. How, I would say, we've got a senior leadership team here and then a leadership team. How are leaders encouraging their teams to also be curious? Because it becomes a cultural thing, curiosity, right? It could be one of those values you see on a wall, be curious. How do you actually inspire people to be curious by nature?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. And I think sometimes if you give people a platform to share information about themselves that they perhaps wouldn't normally share, just the act of that sharing leads to questions, because people feel, okay, this is a forum for us to learn more about each other. Because I think people sometimes they're curious, they'll think the question, but then they think, it's too nosy, or what if I'm intruding, or
no one else has asked that, so I can't ask that.
Because I think all of us are naturally curious about,
for sure.
I don't make huge assumptions, but many of us are naturally curious about others.
Yeah.
So I think it's like one particular tool that I shared in this big group for the senior leadership team was the personal user manual. And I don't know if those of you who haven't heard of that before, it would just be a document with maybe sort of 8 boxes, and in each box is a question, and a question something like, how do you like to receive feedback? Or what makes you do your best work?
Oh, nice.
Or tell us something about you that you'd like your colleagues to know. And you can choose whatever questions you like, right? But the idea is that you share that document around, and you get your team members to fill it out, and then you maybe have a team meeting, and perhaps a couple of people share, or if you've got time, it's an off-site, maybe everybody has a chance to fill that out and share with each other. But just the act of sharing that level of information is so powerful, because imagine how many conversations would you need to have with your colleague before that information comes out, right?
Yeah.
They may leave before you even get get through it. So by sort of facilitating that level of information sharing, you suddenly open things up, like, you love Scrabble, didn't know that about you, or whatever it might be, right? So and so what was really powerful in this particular session was, on, let's say it was a 3-day leadership meeting. On day 1, I spoke about empathy and shared this tool, and then on day 3, I wasn't there, but somebody told me that the CEO had completed this for himself and shared it with the entire SLT. So of course,
amazing.
then that's great for them all to think, I can do that with my own team, and then it starts to cascade down.
Definitely, but it does need to come from the leaders, right? It's much more difficult to do that bottom up. So I think that statement from that person filling it in almost instantly just sets the tone.
And I love that because of all the reasons I've talked about earlier, of just practical examples of how to initiate this notion of curiosity. And what I'm hearing there, Shola, is it's about creating a space for that curiosity to thrive with workshops and questions and offsites and like that. And it's not about, necessarily knowing the answers to those questions, but it's more about the psychological safe space that creates for natural curiosity to thrive.
Yeah, absolutely. And it could even be if you're in let's say you've got a meeting, and then you say to people, what did you do at the weekend? Or what's one movie you watched recently that you enjoyed? And people share that. And that creates what we call hooks, conversational hooks, where, if you watch the same movie as me, just read, oh, right, Peter, must chat to you later because love to hear your thoughts on that film, right? So just whatever little snippets we can share, nuggets, it just should hopefully, in the right environment, lead to further conversation, connection, trust, collaboration, blah, 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 etc.
Yeah, and I think it's just important to set that tone, because I think some people will naturally feel comfortable sharing those things, and some people will naturally not and feel, this is my workplace, this is not appropriate. I don't want people to know that I binge-watched Love Island. Guilty. So I think it becoming part of the culture that people feel comfortable to do that. But I'm really keen, Shola, I think creating a culture of curiosity can be amazing for all the reasons we just said, but how do you ensure that it becomes productive rather than disruptive? Because if people are constantly trying to be curious by nature, whether that's in their field or through building relationships or communicating, it can add a lot of time, and arguably some people might find it actually quite disruptive.
Yes.
Thoughts?
Yeah, no, it's a good point. And I think with anything, it's to what degree, right? So some people will naturally, as you say, be very into these sorts of conversations, others less so. I don't think you can force people, right? So you can give people opportunities and encourage them to go so far. But, if somebody doesn't really want to share loads, that's fine. And I think also leaders have got to understand that we shouldn't, and this goes with empathy as well, where people often think empathy is about being really soft or just letting people get away with anything, and you've just got to still have clear standards in place and let people understand that you can be yourself and be human in the workplace, but you're paid a salary to do a thing, right? So there's no relaxation of that as well.
Yeah, there is a line, an invisible line, which you should naturally understand. And again, I think if you've communicated that well as a team in terms of the culture of being curious, but you don't want to ask impersonal questions. So yeah, I think you're right. It's a very difficult balance, but hopefully one that naturally leaders can help set guardrails around as well.
So speaking of lines, let's draw one under curiosity and move on to the second C. Do we need a drum roll?
Shall we have another drum roll?
Come on then. The second C is courage. And I chose this because it's not easy for many people, for a lot of people to express what they're really feeling, or to be empathetic. But to be empathetic, you've got to open yourself up to what's going on for somebody else, and that can press buttons, it can be triggering, it can be exhausting, right? So it takes some courage to develop empathy and this level of communication in the workplace.
I just think of the lion from The Wizard of Oz, because he had to be courageous.
Yes.
But I just think it's a really nice example, because again, you judge a book by cover. A lion is meant to be courageous and he wasn't, and then they all worked as a team to make the lion feel comfortable to have courage.
Okay, good, nice segue. So I know how it works in The Wizard of Oz, but how do you coach courage then, Shola? I mean, I feel like you're definitely going to have an answer, but this seems to me to be harder than the curiosity one. Like, what kind of practical things are in your toolkit to coach courage?
Yeah, it's a good point. And sometimes when I talk about this, I talk about emotional audacity, right? So, because to be audacious sounds a bit more exciting than, oh, I was brave and courageous. Whereas audacity is, there's something kind of like a bit swashbuckling,
bit more like spicy about it. Yeah,
it's and one way I like to explain it is that, people go to the gym or yoga or whatever, you do your reps, right? So emotional audacity is about doing your emotional reps. Maybe it's having a conversation with somebody that, it may not go that smoothly, or you're a little bit, it might be a conversation you don't particularly want to have, right?
You're very nervous about it.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then recognizing that however challenging that may be, you'll come out the other side stronger, better, more confident at communication. And so taking that on. And so, as I say, that word audacity is just about acknowledging the individual for what they've done, rather than making them feel kind of, it's dutiful, but maybe a bit boring, or a bit, bit hard, etc. So I think reframes like that can help people understand and recognize how important this is alongside, whatever their day-to-day regular, responsibilities are in their role.
Yeah. And
Go on, G.
I was just going to say that I feel the word courage carries this weight of, the analogy of a lion, big character, I'm courageous, I'm brave, I can have difficult conversations. Yeah. So I think it's interesting, if you look at the complete different cocktail of leaders you probably have in your business, you'll probably naturally bucket some people like, they're the courageous bunch.
Exactly.
They're the non-courageous bunch. And I think by default, if there's something uncomfortable or you need to approach something with courage, you'd probably default saying, I'm going to put that leader in to have that conversation. Whereas you want that group of people to all really try and embody these things. So I think it is difficult when you're naturally going to default to the louder, more confident characters.
Right, it's all relative though, isn't it? Because it's sort of, I hear you, it kind of reminds me of the conversation we were having earlier about engagement and how that word can mean different things and there's different ways to achieve it. I guess, as it pertains to leaders, where are they on the audacity scale? And how can they, based on where they are on that scale, start to practice a bit more audacity in the way that they communicate? For someone who's already up here, it might be doing something absolutely crazy and, whatever at a all hands or a company meeting. But for someone who's down here, it's just about getting their reps in. They're starting with the 5 kg weights, not the kind of 55 kg weights. So how can they, whether it's, recording a video for the first time or, working up to their first Ask Me Anything session. But I guess trying to benchmark where they are on the audacity scale and designing a rep program to level them up.
Yeah, such a good point, because everyone starts from a different place. And I think that, the important thing here is it's a two-way thing as well. So being emotionally audacious, you're sharing, but you're also giving space to others around you to share. Because you might have one of these people who's, right, I'm going to go in, I'll tell them, I don't care. But those people aren't necessarily the best at listening back and giving people space to share what's going on for them. And it again, if we're talking about engagement, about good communication, it's got to be two-way. So those people who perhaps they're not so good at the sharing part, they might be very good at the listening and hearing back. So I think by keeping in mind that there's those two aspects of it, wherever you are, you know, you're probably not as low as you might think, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
For me, I've just an example and an individual really springs to mind for courageous, and here's one piece of advice that he gave to me, and he was the CTO of a previous business I worked for, and he just said, one of my biggest regrets in my career is that I had to let somebody go, and he's, you know, would promote that he's an introvert, and he was like, so naturally, well, I wasn't necessarily that excited about this conversation. I was feeling a bit nervous, but you have to have it as a senior leader in the business. And sorry, I'm ringing. Can't say popular. You have to have these conversations. You know, as chief technology officer, these things happen. And he said, what I really regret about it is that the conversation went okay, but it was just this generic sort of script that I'd been given from the people team. And afterwards we went our separate ways, and he said this colleague was calling me, obviously just wanting to have a conversation. And he said, I didn't pick up the phone. And he said, he's like, I can picture her name on my phone, and it's just one of my biggest regrets, because in that moment, and he said that I've now carried this through everything, is I should have just been a human.
Yes.
And that, for me, displayed that he didn't necessarily have the courage to answer the phone. He said, all I should have done is, I'm so sorry, this is such a horrible situation. Yes. How can I help? You know, and he was like, how I would just respond as a human having that phone conversation with anybody else. And that moment just really stuck with me, because for me, he was such an inspirational leader, being an introvert, but I found him so inspiring. The fact that that was his regret just meant he's learned so much from that he should have just been really human and courageous in that moment to have a different impact.
This is a funny situation that we've got ourselves in the workplace, where actually you do need to be courageous in order to be human.
Which is true, because he had this script, and why didn't he just feel that he could just...
I totally agree. And they're kind of like, you know, whatever cancel culture sort of environment that we're in, everyone's too scared to say the wrong thing that they say the inhuman thing. And I think in conversations, obviously nuanced in the environment you're in, because, you know, there's sort of HR things happening there. Get that. But I still think in the general...
That example can, definitely.
Yeah, like, you know, having leaders feeling like they need to be courageous just to be human in the way that they communicate with their people. There's something off there where they're defaulting in many cases to a non-human style, and having to summon some courage to, you know, get back to their true self.
Yes, yeah. And I guess it's, you know, it's not every organisation that's like this, but business, what's business about? Is it about looking after people? Is it about just profit by any means necessary, right? And a really interesting book that I read recently, because a client had asked me to, is a book called The Heart of Business by Hubert Joly, Joly, if anyone's looking. And
we'll put it in the show notes.
I tried to say it my French accent, Hubert Joly, but Hubert Joly. Good
English version,
and he was the CEO of Best Buy, which is a big consumer electronics brand in the States. And they were really doing very poorly. And he took over, and he said, let's put people first. So he said, people... whatever it was in the middle, people, process, profits, or something like that, in that order. And so just there's so many wonderful stories in there about how he turned around the organisation really by, you know, looking at the relationships that he had, you know, strategic partnerships, helping people feel that they were really part of things. So it's just a really interesting book, because most business books, I think, I need to read this, and I pick it up like, you're sort of steeling yourself for the usual kind of...
The first couple of pages, it's going to be a tough one.
And I remember looking at it, and I was on audiobooks, and he started saying, everyone, we need to have a paradigm shift, and it was like, yes. But I could just completely exhale and relax and enjoy this book. So anyone out there who's thinking that they want to have a listen, it's very good.
I mean, even just that sentiment of, I need to put people first, I'm like, hallelujah. I'm going to read that book. Have you read it?
I have not, no.
Is it on the Peter Durkin read list now for 2025?
Sure, get it on there.
Cool.
Yeah, currently reading Nexus.
Are you?
Yeah, but
nice.
We'll talk about that another time. I'm excited for the crescendo of I love three of anything, most of all C's. So what have we got, Shola? Final drum roll, please.
Okay.
So the third C is catalyst. Catalyst. And the reason I chose that is because I studied chemistry. No, I did study chemistry as a younger person, but that's nothing to do with why I chose catalyst. So a catalyst, as we know, is someone or something that makes change happen around them.
Yeah.
And that person may not themselves need to be changed, but they are there to make change happen. And I believe that if we are being empathetic and we are truly listening to others, we will start to learn what they need to grow, to move forward, to do the next thing. And so then we can step into this role of catalyst to help facilitate that growth, whether it's through asking the right questions, whether it's if we're in a leadership role, maybe there's more tangible things we can do to help people move forward. But I know, if I go back to my own story, I talked about struggling as a communicator when I was younger. And I had a coach. And I remember one day talking I was actually crying. I think we were in John Lewis on Oxford Street, and that's where we had our coaching sessions. So I was crying like, I want to be a speaker, but how can I? Well, I had such a tough background in communication. And this coach said to me, well, look, do you really want this? And I said, yeah. And he said to me, okay, well, just get a diary, get a notebook, and let's make a plan. And he didn't do the work. He just said, let's make it happen. Wow. And he had that belief. He believed in me when I didn't believe in myself,
so true,
right?
Though, yeah.
And what did it take from him?
He didn't make the plan for you. He was just saying, we're in John Lewis, let's get a diary.
Exactly. And so I think a lot of us...
We're halfway there, really.
It might be an expensive one.
But we all can be that for the people around us.
Yeah.
It doesn't take a lot, quite honestly. And so I think this is the kind of action part. This is where we inspire others to do more, be more, etc.
It's just so true, isn't it? Because the work is not on the leader. It's just being that change agent. I feel like we talk about this a lot at Blink because, sorry. Dollar in the swear jar. We're not allowed to talk about Blink on the Blink podcast.
Oh dear.
Okay, I'll talk about a previous workplace. But I always came into work, whether Blink or otherwise, it's like, where's my personal development plan? How am I getting promoted? And I remember one manager once told me, it was like, well, I don't know, what's your plan? Like, tell me. I'm here to help and make it happen, but it's on you. And I think just though that sort of like shift in mindset for me, I was like, you're right, it is on me, and I think sometimes people are very quick to be like, this hasn't happened, or, the person hasn't done that. I said, but it's just asking those questions and inspiring a change of mindset sometimes to then, change that course of action. Because I think from that, I'm told I'm not a strategic thinker. This is one of my competencies, as I was told I was supposed to be at the age of 22. I was like, I have no strategic thinking. I think for 5 minutes. But, the question I remember my manager asking me, it made me just approach it completely differently. And I think that's it. It's inspiring that change in people to change your course of action.
Yeah, because there's a few, like the examples that you folks are giving here. I'm trying to apply this to a leader listening to this podcast. And is the takeaway here that actually this isn't all on you? You can work with a catalyst that can help you make this change and start communicating in a particular way? Or is it for the leaders to themselves
be the catalyst?
Exactly.
Yeah.
I guess maybe like most things in life, it can be a combination of both. What do you think about that, Shola?
Yeah, I mean, typically when I'm sharing this with leaders, it's really about them being a catalyst.
Okay.
And about a way to give to others. Because if you're a leader, you've got some, privilege, if you like. So how can you support others around you? And it doesn't have to be this really onerous, because people always say things like, well, can you be my mentor? And it's like, oh, God, so much work, right?
Yeah.
But it could just be a couple of questions here. Or I was at Imperial College a couple of weeks ago talking about empathy, and we talked about catalysts, and I asked people who for them had been catalysts. And one woman shared that I think she worked for a tech company, and she was being given a hard time by some of her colleagues. And one of the leaders literally just sat down with her at lunch one day and just said, I see what you're doing, doing a great job, what's next for you, whatever. And they never spoke again, right? But just that was enough to really get her feel seen, help her move to the next step. So yeah, just small things can make a huge difference.
But how are you, coaching leaders to have a catalyst mindset? Because I think it is very easy when you're in a large organisation just to be getting on with the day job. And I think it is a mindset thing as well. And I know it's a type of questioning. And how are you coaching leaders to have the mindset of, I need to be the catalyst here, rather than thinking, well, no, employees need to come to me, or if I see that, I'll take action. I don't know, how does this become a reality for leaders? Yeah. I'm thinking back to this workshop of curious people and, you then getting on to maybe the catalyst phase of your workshop. How are you telling these people practically to be catalysts in their businesses?
Yeah. Well, there's so many ways that we can be catalysts. So it could be setting stretch goals for somebody, or it could be, I hate that word, amplify someone's voice, but if somebody's not cutting through, it might be, I heard you said so-and-so, I'm going to share that and say that it came from you. There's just so many different ways that we can support people. And I know that one sort of tool that I talked about when I came to Blink and we did the dinner was this idea of big talk and small talk. And the sort of questions that you ask in small talk are things like, how are you? Whereas a big talk question might be, how are you feeling after ... And so by asking those sorts of big talk questions, I think we can naturally segue to catalyst type behaviour, because we've then got enough information from the individual
to put
to
that
say,
into
action. So have you thought about doing bloody blah blah then? Or, you've told me this, what about this as the next step? Again, doesn't have to be a massive thing, but it's just the conversation just goes a little bit further and is a little bit deeper than it might usually be.
So is a big talk question something that's slightly more specific to the individual? Because how are you, I know, is specific to the individual, but can be relatively generically answered. Whereas if I say, Shola, how did you feel your speech went at the Barbican? Does it have to be really specific to the individual? So you do actually need to know an element about them anyway, right? To ask those big talk questions.
I think I don't know, in my head, based on what you're saying, it's a combination of specificity, but also like some empathy within the question itself. Like, not how was the speech at the Barbican, but how are you feeling after the reaction that you got to the speech at the Barbican? I guess it's a different way of framing the same question, but the experience for the respondent is very different. I'm inclined to answer it in a very different way.
Yes, rather than, it went well, thanks.
Yeah.
I feel X, Y, Z.
Yeah, absolutely. And some people might need to use the small talk questions as a kind of prelude to the big talk. But if you think about, if your time's limited, or you don't want the conversation to go off in that kind of very bland, well, yes, it was way, you might want to get in with the big talk question as soon as you can, rather than waiting and,
wasting your time.
Yeah, well, maybe.
If you've only got a quick exchange.
Yeah. Make everything count, make it count. Each interaction, make it count.
And what about if we're looking at this with a sort of internal comms lens, and an internal comms leader trying to work with their leadership team to effectively communicate and reach everybody in the organisation? What does that look like from a catalyst perspective and behaviour? Is it trying to get the internal comms leader to act as a catalyst to ask big talk questions from their leaders so that they can, be more inspirational with the approach of how they communicate, or is it ideas for creativity? What's the dynamic there from a comms perspective, do you think, internally? Is it working with internal comms leaders, or is it with the leaders themselves for this mindset?
I think it's both, to be honest, because I think in some places the leaders are kind of ready just to be told, right, you need to be catalysts, right, and they're ready. I think in other places you might need the internal comms people to work on the leaders to encourage them to share, the right level of information, or to encourage them, in some sort of behaviour that will then cascade through the organisation. So I think it could potentially be both, right?
Yeah,
Whoever
they
needs
need to be the catalyst, and they're questioning to inspire then the leaders to be.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is a very practical and actionable advice, Shola. I'm thinking back to sort of how we introduced the session around one of the levers for communication in 2025 being, how do we get leaders involved? And I think we've talked through the 3 C's here, connecting them back to that principle, right? So from a curiosity perspective, leaders have got to give their teams the space and time for their natural curiosity to grow in order that they might get closer to those leaders. And also, I think, channel their natural curiosity about the business into their direct teams, such that they might have a more empathetic relationship with them and be more comfortable communicating in a human way. But the point about courage, I think, was well made as well, that, we're not all the same. We are at different stages on the audacity scale, and working with leaders to design a plan that helps them to exercise that model of courage or audacity, to get more comfortable communicating in a way that is suitable for them, I think is super actionable and specific as well. And finally, this point about being a catalyst, I haven't thought about it like this before, and I'm not sure. I don't know. I don't know how many leaders would think about the responsibility that they have to catalyze people within their teams, changing the type of questions they ask from small talk to big talk, in order that their teams feel closer to them and their leaders feel closer to their teams. The output of that relationship, you would expect, is more human and empathetic communication, because it's built on real trust and relationships. So thank you for today. I think it's been super insightful, and I think those listening will be able to take real toolkits back into their businesses, and hopefully start to challenge and inspire some of their leaders at the same time.
Wonderful.
And Shola, I would just like your one takeaway for today. So if you could give leaders one golden nugget, what would that be to ultimately elevate being more effective communicators in their business?
I think for me, it's the emotional audacity. It's really just taking it next level in terms of being more transparent, more receptive of hearing from people around you. I think that could really make a big difference.
Big difference. I also just love the naming of the 3 C's, because they're not generic. They're very unique. I love the term catalyst, I think, and emotional audacity. It doesn't really fit into the...
You'd never forget them or get them wrong, would
I'm
you?
not... Well, funny story, guys, because I got them wrong. Melting
epic.
face emoji. And Shola, throughout the year, we're meeting various people through events and, webinars and podcasts, and we're building this ultimate survival playlist for 2025. And maybe the wording's wrong because it's already negative, but it's just like a bit of a hype playlist that makes us, thank you, that makes us feel better, appreciates the work. It is challenging sometimes in large organizations, trying to inspire change and be good communicators and reach everyone. So do you have a track that we could add to this playlist for the year?
Gosh, this is the $1 million question, isn't it, really?
This is why we're here.
This is the $1 million question, is it?
Yeah. So I was I'll be trying to decide what really inspires me versus what might inspire other people.
Right.
But you know what? I'm just going to go with one that inspires me, and hopefully it'll inspire you too.
Great.
So
I'm loving the emotional audacity here, Charlotte.
yeah, it's out there. Yeah. It's out there. So I don't know who remembers the Brand New Heavies. It's a band, sort of a acid jazz band.
Okay, I'm writing it down. Show notes.
I don't know, the 90s, I guess.
Yeah.
But they had a song called You Are the Universe. And it's all about, there's nothing, the lyrics are, you are the universe, there's nothing you can't do.
Ooh.
If you believe it, you can achieve it. That's why I believe in you. Yes, I do.
Come on.
Oh, wow. Okay, love.
So I think it's just about empowering yourself to do what needs to be done and recognizing that it's all in you.
Oh my gosh, love. So that's your ultimate track for the year.
I
Will
think
you be
so.
listening to it on the way to the Barbican?
Might do, actually.
Come on, let's get it on now. Shola Kay, thank you so much for coming and joining us. Good luck at the Barbican this afternoon. And we look forward to seeing you at one of our famous dinners very soon.
Wonderful. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Shola.
Georgie. That
Lovely
was so
to see
much
you.
fun.